The year was 1929 and Prohibition was in full swing. That meant organized crime was reaping the benefits, running the country's speakeasies and illegal liquor trade. An up-and-coming young group of mafiosos called the Young Turks was looking to make a name for themselves at the time, and they were smart enough to know they couldn't go it alone. They frequently worked for other higher-ranking mobsters as enforcers, and the most feared of the lot was Charles Luciano, a notorious Italy-born gangster who worked for boss Joe Masseria and had a tight relation with local Jewish gangsters like Meyer Lansky. He was highly influential and knew how to manipulate his way into the halls of power. By 1925, he was bringing in millions a year in illegal gambling and bootlegging and was becoming one of the city's most powerful gangsters, too powerful for some. Masseria was one of the most powerful gangsters in the city, and the other was Salvatore Maranzano, a ruthless man known for targeting Masseria's men for assassination. He saw a chance to cut the legs out from under his rival by targeting his newest powerful associate. So Luciano wound up in the crosshairs, and one day they approached him and threw him in the back of a limousine. If they had simply shot him from the car, he probably would have been a goner, but they apparently wanted to send a message. They beat him and stabbed him in the face, but that left him alive, and he was able to scramble away. He was scarred for life and left with a distinct drooping eye, but it did not deter him. He was about to show the mob scene just how vicious he was. After surviving his first assassination attempt, Luciano picked up a new nickname, Lucky. It stuck, and from there on out, he was unstoppable. Within 3 years of his survival, he'd taken out Maranzano in revenge for trying to kill him, and Masseria for standing in his way. He soon took over the network and created the Mafia Commission to negotiate disputes between the families. That way, people were less likely to get thrown into the back of limousines and stabbed. Uncle Sam soon came looking for the notorious gangster, and he was charged with serious crimes, but he never served time in prison, instead negotiating a deal to be returned to his native Italy thanks to providing vital intelligence during World War II. Even against the government, Lucky Luciano lived up to his name. And sometimes it can help to have friends in high places. Greg the Grim Reaper Scarpa was no slouch when it came to the Mafia, one of the most notorious hitmen in history of the Colombo crime family. He also had a major secret. He was a longtime FBI informant and had been working with them since the 1960s when he helped them recover the bodies of 3 murdered civil rights workers. Scarpa, an Italian immigrant, may have been a ruthless gangster, but he hated the Ku Klux Klan and later helped them solve an arson murder. But he wasn't satisfied with his payment. A good deed well done didn't cut it for an aspiring mob boss, so the two parties broke ranks for a while, and Scarpa quickly became a fast-rising figure in the New York mob scene. Not only was he a trusted advisor to boss Carmine Persico, but he was his top enforcer and an infamous hitman, and that put a target on his back. While Scarpa had become deeply enmeshed with the mob, he'd also reconnected with the FBI in 1980 and taken a 6-figure payday for his services. He had a tight relationship with the FBI agent Lindsay DeVecchio, exchanging gifts with him, including a hard-to-find Cabbage Patch doll. He was also a sickly man, having contracted HIV from a tainted blood donation. As he got sicker, he told people in the family he was battling cancer. But other enemies didn't want to see him live to die from that. The acting boss, Victor Arena, saw Scarpa as a wild card loyal to Persico, who was currently in prison, so he made his move, targeting not just Scarpa but his daughter and baby grandson. Cars full of hitmen chased them as Scarpa's instincts kicked in. He drove away as the gunmen approached, led them on a chaotic car chase, and even crashed into some bystanders along the way. He got away, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory. This kicked off a full-on war between loyalists to Persico and Arena, and Scarpa led Persico's forces. But while taking out his rivals and suing the hospital that accidentally gave him HIV, he was arrested for gun crimes and placed on house arrest. He would soon be charged with many of the murders he committed as a hitman and would eventually be targeted at his home, losing an eye in a shootout. By the time he saw the courtroom, he was a very sick man and pled guilty. He would be sentenced to life in federal prison, but the sentence was reduced due to his poor health, and he would die less than a year later in the prison's medical ward. And it wouldn't be until after his death that the full extent of his FBI cooperation would be revealed. Sometimes it's all about who you hire. Anthony Indelicato went into the family business, and the family business was killing. The son of a Bonanno mob boss Alphonse Indelicato was a fast-rising hitman in his father's organization, and by 1979 he was a key player in assassinating rival boss Carmine Galante. But his father's ambition was rubbing many rival gangsters the wrong way, and a power struggle soon erupted. The Indelicato clan was closely aligned with 2 other bosses, and they wanted to knock off the rival heads and take command of the whole organization. But when the rival Massino faction got a hold of the plot, they got the jump on them and put out their own hit. and it was about to make Anthony Indelicato one of the most wanted men in the Mafia. But sometimes one little piece of missing information can screw up a whole operation. Massino and his ally, Dominic Napolitano, kept things local for the main targets, and they successfully engineered a hit that took out Alphonse Indelicato and his two closest allies. But they also wanted the son dead, to ensure that he wouldn't be able to avenge his father. Napolitano had an associate he was looking to promote, and he felt it was time the recruit made his bones as a made man. That meant killing someone, and Indelicato, who had barely avoided being at his father's fatal meeting, was the perfect target. So he gave his friend Donnie the information and waited for word that the last major player of the Indelicato family would be snuffed out. But Donnie had other plans. He was actually Donnie Brasco, aka Joseph Dominic Pistone, an undercover FBI agent who had pulled off one of the most in-depth infiltrations of the Mafia in history. Shortly after the hit was ordered, Pistone's infiltration ended and he was withdrawn. The boss was informed that his hitman was gone, and Indelicato had the chance to escape and head to Florida, where he lay low until Uncle Sam came calling. He was eventually indicted for the Galante murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison, the inevitable outcome of a life he led. But thanks to the hiring choices of a rival boss, he lived to tell the tale. He even got married in prison, was paroled in 1998, and soon went back to his old activities, and then was arrested for another murder in 2006. Some guys never learn, but those who get targeted and survive don't always escape unscathed. In 1991, Peter Fat Pete Chiodo was a union fixer in the Lucchese crime family, and he was notorious for being a brutal enforcer despite his girth. But his luck ran out and he was arrested on RICO charges. Facing a lengthy sentence, he decided to cut his losses and take a deal with the feds. His bosses Vic Amuso and Anthony Casso were enraged. They expected their enforcer to take the hit for them, no matter how long he went to prison, and their long friendship with him didn't matter anymore. They decided to silence him for good and make sure that he took all the secrets to the grave with him. They deputized a team of hitmen to make sure he never saw trial, and they almost succeeded. But Chiodo's saving grace would be an unexpected one. On May 8, 1991, gunmen ambushed Fat Pete and shot him a shocking 21 times, but he was still alive. The critically wounded criminal was rushed to the hospital, and doctors successfully saved his life and removed the bullets. He was one of the most severely wounded Mafia hit victims to ever survive, and the doctor said it wouldn't have happened if he was a smaller man. Chiodo was a whopping 400 pounds, and the heavy layers of fat around his body absorbed the impact and slowed the bullets enough for him to survive. But the men targeting him wouldn't go quietly. Casso and Amuso broke one of the cardinal rules of the mob. They went after the enemy's family and told him that if he testified, they would wipe out Chiodo's whole line. It would be their biggest mistake and one of the darkest chapters in the Mafia history. Chiodo was enraged and likely realized that he couldn't trust his Mafia buddies as far as he could throw them. He was taken into court in a wheelchair only months after being shot, and his statements brought down hell on Amuso and Casso. The evidence piled up, and in retaliation, the mob targeted Chiodo's sister and killed her husband, and 3 more of his relatives would be assassinated in the coming year. But it wouldn't help the bosses. Chiodo's testimony was the key evidence against them, and they were both ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison. As for Chiodo, he did the only thing a man with powerful enemies could do and disappeared into the witness protection program, where he might have used his impressive build to intimidate the head of the Homeowners Association. But not all targets of the Mafia are their fellow Dons. He might be associated with more other things now, but there was a time when people didn't know Rudy Giuliani was a singing jack-in-the-box or a failed presidential candidate or even a mayor. They knew him as the hard-nosed state prosecutor from New York, a proud Italian-American who had no problem taking on his own community and fighting the Mafia's influence in the city. Under the new RICO Act, the government had many more tools to go after the Mafia, and it wasn't long before the heads of the 5 families were under arrest and facing serious charges. It was the biggest move against the Mafia since Elliot Ness took down Al Capone, and it got the attention of people around the world, and some of them were less than happy. The heads of the Mafia families met to vote on whether to take out Giuliani, and several voted against it due to how much heat it would bring down on them. There was no better way to get the attention of the government than to kill one of their men. But while the Lucchese, Bonanno, and Genovese families voted no, the infamous Gambino boss John Gotti was ready to go to war. The 5 families weren't going to be the ones to do it, but that didn't mean Giuliani was safe. Because the seats of power in the Mafia aren't all in America, and word got abroad to the Sicilian Mafia about his prosecutor taking down their top men, The boss of all bosses, Salvatore Riina, apparently not only wanted Giuliani taken out, he was willing to send a hitman to the United States to pull it off. So, what saved the future mayor's life? The reported price on Giuliani's head was a whopping $800,000, one of the biggest contracts ever placed on a politician. But no attempt on Giuliani's life was ever made, at least not that we know of. Giuliani only revealed the plot years later on the Oprah Winfrey Show and commented that a later contract on him by a boss sent to jail for a century was only half the value of the original contract. He'd gone down in value as a target. Maybe the hitman thought the risk was a little too high, but while Giuliani emerged unscathed, not everyone he was close to was so lucky. Famously anti-mafia judge Giovanni Falcone, a close friend of Giuliani, was taken out by Riina's men not long before Giuliani was elected mayor. And he wasn't even the highest-profile New York politician to wind up in the Mafia's crosshairs. Maurizio Avola isn't exactly a trustworthy source. The notorious Cosa Nostra hitman went to prison for life for dozens of murders and armed robberies. But when The Guardian interviewed him in 2016, he had a story that the whole world paid attention to. The Sicilian Mafia usually kept to the island, maintaining an iron grip on its crime scene. So, what would possess the criminal organization to try to kill a sitting New York State governor, especially when it was a proud Italian-American like Mario Cuomo? The popular governor was anti-mafia. Good luck finding a pro-mafia governor in the modern era, but he hadn't picked as many fights with them as Giuliani did. That made a high-profile assassination attempt on him a little puzzling. It turned out that the reason had very little to do with Cuomo himself. By 1992, the war between the mafia and the state in Italy was full speed ahead. Two prominent anti-mafia judges had been killed, and the Cosa Nostra wanted to make a statement. They wanted everyone to know that the country was theirs to run, and what better way to do that than target prominent politicians and members of organizations to make clear to the whole world that no one was safe from their reach. This was around the time that the three-term governor decided to make his return to the ancestral soil, and Avola got the idea to target him from his godfather? Maybe read up on the spiritual guidance part of that job description. The idea was that targeting a high-profile American politician would warn the Americans off interfering in mafia business. This may not have been the smartest move. Usually, a high-profile assassination will bring down more heat against the organization, not less. It's entirely possible that a targeted killing of Mario Cuomo would have led to a joint U.S.-Italian operation to root out and eliminate the mafia's leadership by any means necessary. But it wasn't to be. As Cuomo arrived in Rome for a week of meetings and exploring, he brought a hefty security detail with him. Was this his standard international detail, or had someone got a tip that he was in danger? It's not clear, but as soon as the Mafia hit squad, a dozen men with assault rifles and explosives, saw what they were up against, the boss called off the attack, and it became one of the biggest Mafia attacks that never was, only revealed over 2 decades later by the infamous killer. And it doesn't really take that much to wind up on the Mafia's radar. Sometimes you just need to be a celebrity. Fats Waller was one of the most acclaimed jazz pianists of the 1930s, and word soon got out that he was a man who could liven up a party. As an African-American celebrity, he had a target on his back, but he wasn't expecting to be a target. That made it all the more shocking when he was held at gunpoint and shoved into a car. He was taken to an undisclosed location where he was presented with a piano and told to play or be shot. He complied and gave birthday boy Al Capone the show of a lifetime. He would eventually be released unharmed, but not before a 3-day marathon that was probably the scariest concert of his life. And he wasn't the only black star to run into the Mafia. Sammy Davis Jr. wasn't just a star, he was one of the Rat Pack, and that opened doors quickly. He soon found himself in a relationship with the bombshell movie star Kim Novak, and their torrid relationship became tabloid fodder. An interracial romance was controversial back then, but no one was angrier than Novak's manager Harry Cohn, an infamous fixer with mob ties. He didn't want his prized client to receive any bad press, and he went so far as to send a mobster to threaten Davis's father and let him know that his son had a contract on his head. That was enough to scare Davis to end the relationship, casting a pale over the two stars' careers. And one movie star might not have even known who he was in bed with. When people think of Steven Seagal, they probably don't think of his business savvy. The martial arts bruiser was one of the most popular action stars of the 1990s, but he wanted to go a different way. A convert to Buddhism, he started to hate violence and was ready to close the book on his action movie career. The problem was he had trusted the wrong person. His business partner, Julian Nasso, had been cutting deals with the mob for years, and they had been taking kickbacks from his movies. They weren't willing to see their income stream dry up, so the Mafia tried to intimidate him into sticking with the status quo. And Seagal did the only thing an action star could do. He worked with the FBI and testified, which we suppose is the legal equivalent of delivering a falcon kick. And even one of the most wholesome stars around faced off against the mob. Tony Bennett is best known for a silky smooth singing voice, but during the earlier days of his career, he was a notorious ladies' man. The singer had a passionate affair with a woman in the 70s, but she just so happened to be the girlfriend of notorious mob hitman Tony Spliotro, one of the Chicago outfit's most ruthless agents. He went and confronted Bennett, and most people who angered him might wind up buried in the desert. But maybe Bennett was too high profile because Spliotro decided to use a less lethal weapon, a phone book, to beat some fear into Bennett. Having escaped a close call with death, Bennett reportedly decided to get away from the mob scene for good, something that seems to have served him well as he made it to 95 years old. But no Mafia assassination attempt was more bizarre than this one. The Mafia was mentioned frequently around the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Many people think the lone gunman theory just doesn't hold up, and a common suspect was the Mafia bosses who Kennedy and his brother Robert frequently went to war with as president and attorney general. But after files were declassified related to the assassination, those conspiracy theorists came up empty. But there was a consolation prize: crazy reveals about how the CIA may have been cutting deals with the Mafia to kill one of their most famous enemies, the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro, who had been a thorn in the government's side since he took office and played a role in bringing the Kennedy administration to the brink of nuclear war. And it centered around two notorious gangsters. Sam Giancana and Johnny Rosselli were two mid-level mobsters who were looking for a get-out-of-jail-free card. The CIA was looking for some dirtbags who could do their dirty work without the government being implicated. And the two mobsters had a personal grudge against Castro too. He had closed down their lucrative casinos in Havana when he nationalized the economy, and they were looking for revenge. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, the government couldn't risk being caught directly attempting to take out Castro, so they outsourced. But while the CIA thought they were getting the best gangsters in the world, they in fact were actually recruiting the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Because every time Giancana and Rosselli made an attempt on Castro's life, it went horribly wrong. The arrangement was nearly derailed from the start. When it came out that the mobsters had recruited CIA operatives to bug the hotel room of a love rival of Giancana's, the government decided not to prosecute the goons, to not derail the operation, but it was enough to make Robert Kennedy swear off working with the Mafia in the future. But things didn't get any better from there. Attempted assassins got cold feet, many of their business connections seemed more interested in spying on rivals, and the plans largely went nowhere. When JFK was assassinated, the new administration wanted the CIA to get out of the cloak and dagger business. Giancana fled to Mexico, Rosselli wound up managing casinos for Harold Hughes, and as for Fidel Castro, he outlived 7 presidential administrations. Want to learn more about the secrets of the Italian Mafia? Check out FBI Reveals Secret Mafia Initiation Ceremony, or watch The Killing Methods in Sicilian Mafia Families for the grim and gritty details.